Good afternoon and welcome everyone. I'm Melissa Bostrom. I'm the Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development in the Graduate School, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the third in our three-part series on navigating the academic application, interview, and negotiation process. So today we wrap up with our panel on the negotiation process once you have successfully gone through the application and interview process. So in just a moment, I want to introduce our panelists, but first I want to note our thanks to our collaborators in this year's Academic Job Search Series, the Office of Postdoctoral Services. Mark Matheson from Postdoc Services is here to film today's event, and then also the Duke Career Center. So the Academic Job Search Series is an ongoing series throughout this year. We have, I think, a mere 15 events this fall, and probably quite a few coming up in the spring as well. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. All right, without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. Starting to your far left, we have Elizabeth Marsh, who is Associate Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience here at Duke. She received her BA in Psychology from Duke University, her AM in Cognitive Psychology from Stanford University, and also her PhD in Cognitive Psychology from Stanford University. Welcome, Dr. Marsh. To her left is Dr. James Kirkley, who is Associate Professor of Religion and Ethics at Shaw University, as well as the Chair of the Department of Religion and Philosophy. He received his Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Bucknell University, his Master of Divinity from Gordon. Yeah, all right.
Air 5.
And a degree that doesn't usually follow that, Master of Divinity from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. And his PhD in Christian Theology and Ethics from Duke University. So, Dr. Kirkley, very pleased to welcome you back. And then finally, to my immediate right is Dr. Mina Garcia, who is Associate Professor of Spanish at Elon University. She received her BA in English Philology from Universidad de Malaga. Also her MA in Spanish and Latin American Literature from Duke University. Her PhD in Spanish Philology and Early Modern Literature from Universidad de Malaga, and her PhD in Spanish Language and Literature from Duke, because one PhD wasn't enough. Okay, so perhaps an overachiever in our midst. So today, as with the previous panels, a number of you submitted excellent questions as part of the registration process. I've shared those questions with our panelists. We'll start with those prepared questions and then move on to more of an open Q&A to make sure that I think we should be able to get everybody's questions addressed. So I'm going to start with Beth first on the first question, and then we'll just kind of rotate as we go through. So the first question is, what elements should finalists expect to see addressed in an initial offer for a faculty position in the humanities or social sciences at your institution? And that question has two subs. One, are all elements of that package equally negotiable? And two, what factors can a candidate introduce into negotiation even if they are not part of the initial offer?
So when it says, I have a clarification on the question, it says your institution, so I'm only supposed to talk about this for Duke? Because it's going to be very different in different schools.
I think, yes, if you can,
Okay.
if you can represent all of Duke, that would be fantastic. in the social sciences, perhaps, in psychology and neuroscience.
No, but I'm saying it'll be very different at like other universities.
Right. Yes.
Yeah,
and
I don't
exactly.
know about other departments.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll start out with Duke then, because Duke would be a pretty typical research one institution, and so for a psychologist, you would expect to be negotiating salary, startup for your lab, space, maybe your tenure clock, appointments, maybe teaching. I think this is going to vary dramatically though from institution to institution. I know people who have taken jobs at small schools and they don't really have much startup, so they might, and things like, I guess I forgot, moving expenses would be another one, start date. So at some small schools, they just kind of expect you to leave you on your own basically for research resources, or else they say, okay, what do you need? I'll give you 3 computers and you're done. Whereas in my department here at Duke, I would estimate that our startup packages probably range from $200,000 to $2 million, depending on the particular needs of a person, whether or not they run a wet lab with animals, for example. So it's just going to be really, really different depending on what you do and what institution that you're at. When you ask me if all elements are equally negotiable, I would say no. For example, at Duke, we have in my department, we would not be able to negotiate teaching load. We have a hard floor, and it's a very good floor, and we could not go below it. Some schools, maybe you could. I think most things are up for negotiation if you have reasons for them. I don't think it goes as well if you just say, I want more money. But if you have reasons why you need different things, I think that's a different issue. And in terms of what can you introduce in the negotiation, even if they're not part of the initial offer, the two that pop to mind are deferrals, like waiting a year to take the job, and the favorite two-body problem.
Great, we're going to come back to that later on. Thank you. Jim.
Okay, I'm going to be sort of the wild card here. We are not a research institute. If you know anything about Shaw University is the oldest HBCU, that's historically black college university in the South, founded in 1865. We are a minority institution, and we are small. Liberal arts institution in the country today, especially if you're coming from the humanities, social sciences, be glad you're getting a job offer. And recognize that. There's not a lot that you're going to negotiate at our university. Time, hours, etc. One of the things I'd suggest you do, get a copy of the faculty handbook from wherever you are talking with. And those things generally are available online. In there, you'll get all this information about what they expect from you as far as class load, office hours, committee work, all that type of thing, what they are going to be expecting of you, and stuff that may not actually come up when you're negotiating, when you're talking. And it'll also tell you what they are contractually obligated to provide for you as far as benefits and all sorts of things. And those things are important. Again, if you were talking to Duke, as far as the tuition benefit, so that's a biggie. When you get vested. My wife is an employee of Duke, so we follow that kind of stuff. And so recognize that. Recognize, and a lot of the stuff Beth said goes for any place as far as what's negotiable, what's not negotiable. Recognize that at smaller institutions, contracts may be laid out, and there's not going to be a lot of room. And I've already caused one gasp here today. Our normal course load, and so everybody's sitting, our normal course load is a 5.5. Yes, 15 hours each semester. If you are doing research, if you're getting a grant, then you get course release for that stuff. But and that's the same anywhere. But that's one of those things where you have to be providing the grant. And applying for that yourself. Our contracts generally, as chair of the department, I don't know what my faculty is making. See, all this type of stuff, you go, wow, yeah, things are different outside of these towers. I have no clue what my faculty, because I don't, have access to that stuff. HR, the vice president of academic affairs, and the president know that information. And so when I want to hire somebody, say I wanted to hire Amina to teach, I'd go through the stuff, go through all the paperwork, get the recommendations, the interviews, et cetera, put that stuff forward. She would actually get the job offer from HR and the vice president. Okay. So we'll leave it at that. We'll come back to some of the other questions afterwards.
So I'm going to read a couple of points that I wrote, because I don't want to forget what my offer said. My offers address my title, my salary, the length of the contract, the teaching load, moving expenses, and the faculty development package. So how much money there is for conferences, possibility of course releases, sabbaticals, etc. Sometimes, and my contract actually said that, it includes information about equipment, like your computer, how often do you get a new computer, office furniture, things like that. And more I see, even when it's not in the offer, that graduate students ask for, or candidates ask for a course release in the first year. Our course load is not 5.5, it's 3.3, but more and more I see that that would be something that the candidates ask for, and now actually it's included in the pool of course releases that the department has. It's always there, you know, small letters, course release for new hire, you know, like it's like just in case. But if you don't ask for it, nobody's gonna offer it. Nobody's gonna say, hey, in the previous 3 years, everybody asked for this. How come you're not asking? You know, you're gonna have to do that yourself. And the salary is somewhat negotiable, but within a range. And of course, if you have another offer in hand, you have, a better possibility of getting that moved. But for example, like the money for conferences and things like that, those are standards. So you're not going to get anything moved out of that. Although, you know, there's always some way of getting around that later on. But that's what my offer included. So not everything is equally negotiable. And the things that you can include, like I said, sometimes people will ask for, we don't call it startup package, but it's something like library funds, kind of. And so in my case, they gave me a pool of money for to get books that I might need for the library and things like that. But that's pretty much what the offer was.
Thank you. So for question 2, I'm going to start with Jim. Question 2 is, how should communications regarding the offer be conducted in general? So when you're negotiating, in other words, what's the preferred communication style and mode? And at what point should the candidate stop trying to negotiate?
Talk to the people who've interviewed you, who are responsible for putting your name forward in the first place. So even though I don't have the power to say, hey, you're going to get an extra $10,000, come through that chain, because they're the people that have talked to you and have interviewed you. And if they want you, recognize you're in a marketplace. And I'm going to repeat this several times today, I know. It's supply and demand. So if you have something that they want, if there are competing offers or if they just, look, we want to hire you, go back to the people that have interviewed you, that have said, hey, we want to hire you. And in my situation, for example, I'd be the one to call up my dean or the vice president and say, hey, we really want this person. They're looking to get a little bit more this or that, or reduce course load, course release. Can we work that out? So that would be the way to go. Now, when do you stop? If I said, look, this is as good as we're going to get. This is all we have. Things are tight. We can't go anymore. That's the time to stop. And, hopefully, again, the chair, the person with whom you've been talking, is going to be honest with you.
And just a follow-up question, Jim. Are those conversations conducted over email, like in writing, over the phone? What's kind of the convention that you see at Shaw?
We can do it both ways. Generally, again, once you reach that level, you can do it by email and go back and forth. If I get an email from one of you saying, hey, been looking at maybe to get a little more, I'm going to pick the phone up and call you. I don't want to leave it at that point because I want to find out exactly what's going on and have that interaction. So I would pick up the phone and call you back if you don't call me.
Yeah, that's how I thought you meant the question. In my case, the way we do it is you get the offer on the phone. So in our case, it's not HR, it's the dean. He or she will pick up the phone and call and tell you exactly what he's offering or she's offering. And immediately after, he will follow up with an email in which he writes everything, very clearly. And then you have a couple of days probably, or in my institution it's a couple of days, and you have the chance to respond by email, or you can ask for more stuff or for negotiating some of the parts. I would say pick your battles. I know you want to negotiate, and I know you want to leave everything as clear as you can from the very beginning. But you can't. Everything cannot be your number one priority. So I would say, choose your battles. And by saying that, you're going to be giving up other things. So if this is your priority, really focus on that, and make peace with the fact that not everything is there. Like Beth said, when you ask for something, make a case for it. You have to bring up why do you need it? How is this going to be of an impact in the department or in the university? How is this going to make your research that much better? How is this going to improve the quality of your classes or any of that? But really make a justification and just say, well, I would like to have a better computer. Well, me too. But what are you really going to do something that requires this extra powerful computer, right? The dean will say to some things yes, to some things no, and to some things it will meet you halfway. It's not. But I wouldn't go back and forth, like a million times, because in the end they start wondering if they made the right decision, because these are people that you're going to have to work with after, and you don't want to have your first impression be like, this is the person who won't give up, I will call and call and call and call, or email me 17 million times, Like at some point, and you will know, because they will say something like, we're tight, or this is as far as it goes, or something like that. But,
and generally, these are the people that are going to be writing your evaluations.
Exactly. These are the people that you're going to go for tenure with. So, you don't want to be that person that, oh yeah, I remember her from, I don't want to do that.
So I think that most negotiations in psychology would probably be either phone or email to start with, because once that letter is finally issued, it's issued because you basically said that you're going to sign it. And so typically, I think what most chairs would ask for, although they occasionally ask about this on the interview, is they would probably ask for some kind of spreadsheet detailing what you need, okay? And that may include everything from like the number of computers to the particular software packages to at R1s, like a research tech. And there's certain things that are more likely to cut. And so, like software is an easy place for them to cut because they have site licenses. If you have a sense if they have shared things or not, they may cut. You don't need an eye tracker, we already have one in the building. So I think that our negotiation will be, most of the negotiation will be at that level, like what's in that startup package. You may also negotiate whether or not the startup package expires. That will be probably non-negotiable at a lot of state institutions, but at Duke, for example, it's basically indefinite. Normally we would negotiate either with the chair or with the dean. When you negotiate with the chair, it's like you're empowering him or her to be your advocate. Like it's not coming out of their pocket, so they are motivated to get you as much as they can. And if a chair tells you, I can't ask the dean for that, then you should listen. If they say to you, if I do X, are you going to sign? And they do X, you better sign. You can't ask for something more at that point in time.
Great, thank you. I'll start with Nina for question 3. That is, how can candidates negotiate the differing hiring timelines at different institutions? So for example, if a candidate has an offer in hand from one institution, but maybe hasn't even been to another place for an on-campus visit, how do you handle that? How do you balance those time frames?
I can only speak for my personal experience in this one. For me, the thing that worked the best was honesty. And it might not be very strategic, and I get that, but that's what worked for me. I actually had that case happen to me. I was interviewing with Elon, which I finally accepted, and on a Friday, and I had an offer that expired, that I had to say something, I had to respond on Wednesday. And I knew it wasn't, a lot of time, but when I was on campus, I told the chair of the search committee, like, this is the situation. And they didn't call me on Tuesday. So, it worked out. When I have been in many, I have been the chair of many search committees, and I have been also appreciative of the fact that people have been honest with me. It lets me know where I stand, it lets me know where they stand, and it makes, so if I can rush the process, I will. It makes us work together a little bit better, I think.
So I would second all of that in that I absolutely would tell if I was getting pressure from another quarter, if this was a job I want.
Right.
I would not do it if this was like my backup job just to get another offer, because you'll meet these people again, even if you don't go to that school. But we would hurry, potentially change interview dates. We would respond if there was a candidate that we wanted that was on a different timeline. The only exception being if the person needed tenure, because that's kind of out of our control, but that would not apply to any of you. I think it's good to let people know if they're the job you really want, to really let them know when you need to find out things. And remember that that's actually another thing you can negotiate, is how long the offer sits for. And some schools will do as low as, I think, 5 days. We used not to put a clock on our offers here at Duke, and we've kind of been forced into doing that more.
Yeah, I wasn't sure most when reading this how this, you have an offer. What do you do with the school that you're waiting for an offer from, or what do you do with the school that you already have an offer from? So I'll try to hit both. I think what both of them have said are excellent. And again, honesty, especially as Beth said, if the school that you're waiting to hear from is the school that you really want to work at, let them know.
Yep.
Say, look, you're my first choice, but I need a job. We all understand that, okay? So they might move up the hiring process. They want you, obviously, if you're being called in for an interview, you're at the top of their list already. So recognize that. Tell them, say, this is where I really would like to be, but I've got this thing waiting on the table. On the other hand, if you want to tell the people that already have an offer from, hey, I'm waiting to hear from Elon because I prefer to work there, that's not a good job, okay? I would not touch that, because again, if it's me, I'm going to say, okay, nice, see you. We'll take somebody who actually would want to work here.
You actually say the competing institution?
No, you don't have, no.
Okay.
No.
I would if you think it's going to make them work harder.
Now,
If someone tells us that they're sitting on an offer from some small school, we're not going to speak for that. When you tell me Harvard wants you, and they will move faster.
Yeah.
I was just sort of as a follow-up, I was wondering, or maybe I misunderstood. So if you have an offer from a school that you aren't crazy about, if reverse that, can you still tell them that you have an offer and ask for an extension? Even if it's a school that it's not your first choice, but...
I think it's fair to ask for a short extension as long as you feel like it is not like a 0%. Like, you don't want to sit on an offer that you know you're definitely going to turn down because somebody else really wants that job. But I think if you need a little bit more time, I think you can ask, and some schools will not do it, and others will.
And it depends on the time of the year.
Yeah.
You know, if we have somebody resign because they just got an offer from Harvard, and now we've got to fill this position because classes start in 2 weeks, no, we're not going to give you an extension because we need to fill that position to get somebody in there teaching. So it just depends on when that is. If it's, you know, March and you're getting hired for the next academic year, yeah, 5 to 6 days, not going to make any difference. 2 weeks isn't going to make any difference.
For us, it would depend on, like, our hiring is not, although you might think it should be, not driven by teaching needs. So it's more like, are we about to lose somebody else? You know, and so if I don't have anyone else I want to hire, then fine, take your time. If there's someone else I want to hire, because normally the quality of the candidates you'll have at the end is amazing, and you may be even trying to get multiple hires out of the dean, I may not be willing to give you as much time because number 2 is unbelievable, and I don't want to lose that person waiting for you.
Thank you. So we're going to start over with Beth first on the next question. So our previous conversation has kind of operated on the assumption that you might have kind of multiple offers in an ideal universe, but can you still negotiate if you only have one offer?
I would say yes, because even if you only have one offer, most psychology departments, for example, will still ask you for that list of things that you need and try to work with you to figure out what you need. I think it becomes much harder to negotiate salary unless you have a reason. So for state schools, for example, normally salaries are public record. Sometimes you have to go hunt them down, but they're there. And so if you get a sense that the salary that you're being offered is way lower than what's normal, then I think you could try to negotiate it up. But again, I think you have to have reasons for doing things, not just saying, I want more, or I can't get my job done without X. But you have to be really careful not to make like threats, like I'm gonna walk away if you don't do X, because you don't have anywhere else to go.
You know, I'll come back to it depends on your discipline. You know, again, if you're coming to Duke in psychology, there's a lot more room to negotiate, and they're going to want you. If you are doing English composition, you don't have a lot of room to negotiate. And it depends, again, supply and demand, market. How many other people are out there? I've gotten job applications for adjunct positions that blow me away. I look at them and I read them, I say, this guy's written more than I have. Why is he not teaching? And so you have to recognize that. And so you may be able to negotiate, so if we ask you to come, you may still be able to negotiate certain things. Times of courses, you know, exactly what the course load is going to look like, what classes you might be able to teach, those type of things. But the nitty-gritty at that point is probably not really up for negotiation.
Yeah, I think they have said it all. Basically, you don't have as much power if you don't have, or as much flexibility if you only have one offer. But you still can negotiate, you know, a couple of things like course salary. Course releases, salary maybe a little bit. Yeah, not a whole lot more. But you know, you still have a little bit that you can tailor to your needs.
Sorry, are you typically just expected to negotiate, or will people assume that you're not going to negotiate in the academic area?
I think it's going to depend on what you're talking about negotiating. Like when you're talking about a startup package, chair's absolutely expecting to discuss that with you and go back and forth to figure out what you really need. But they should tell you if things aren't negotiable. Like in the UC system, they have set pay levels, right? So it may not be very negotiable, and they should tell you that before you come back and ask for more money. We have a hard floor on teaching. We do automatically give our junior faculty a course off. They don't have to ask. But if you ask to go below that, we're going to say no. You know, and so I feel like they kind of let you know if there's room to negotiate, but they won't remind you if you forget a category,
Right.
like parking, which would be a very minor one at the very end.
So our next question comes from somebody in the audience, and I might ask you to help us elaborate on, I think, what your question is. And that is, if a candidate has previous academic experience from a prior time in his or her career, how could that be leveraged during the negotiation process? Is that a fair paraphrase?
Actually, that's my question. Because, I have actually 2 masters, 1 MFA. I'm a Fulbright scholar. I had the privilege to come back to school and do my PhD. And now, there are positions for assistant professors, and I feel like, I have to start over again, and I'm going to negotiate. And it is not that I'm really, because I know the issues of the salary and the negotiation about that, but, to me, after having this experience, I feel like it. A Fulbright scholar, being an assistant professor is like going down. How can I negotiate to be an associate professor? Even if I can, because there are associate professors who are in tenure track.
Okay. It'll depend on the institution, obviously. Okay, another gasp coming from the audience. We don't have tenure at our institution. Thank you. That was my bison friend there. And so, again, get the faculty handbook. Our faculty handbook has it very clearly laid out how one becomes an associate or a full professor. And so, you have to work within those confines. If you're in a tenure institution, that'll be part of your initial offer again, and you may want to try to leverage it, but I'll leave it up to these two to talk about that in tenure institutions, how you could potentially do that. If they, again, supply and demand, if you're a star and they want you, there are ways to work around certain things. Hey, we want to hire you, and yeah, we'll give you the rank of associate professor. In our institution, that's a possibility because we don't have tenure. But just because you've done all these great things doesn't necessarily open the door that you're going to go up in rank. That has to be earned, and it's again, if we did it for you, we have to justify it. When John Doe comes in and he wants that. So that's that's where you leave us. I don't think I answered your question for the puzzled look on your face. I'll give Mina a shot at it.
Of course, I have been in the academia enough, and I know where you're, and I know the game. It just, it's a question that I have and that I have to play with it,
Well, let's hear from Mina and Beth and see if we give you some other options too.
Ideal, and again, we're going back to the faculty handbook. You have to be an assistant professor a number of years before you can be associate. And that's all there is to it. You can negotiate how many years that is. But, and you can shrink it from 6, and I think the minimum you have to be is 3. And I could be wrong, and my team will follow me to the end of the earth. But I think that's the most you can do. So that's the leverage you have. And that's it. I mean, after that, if you go out for tenure, they're going to evaluate your package with everybody else who have been there for 6 years. And you have to present publications and things like that that have your name connected to Elon. So everything that you did before is great, wonderful, but it's not going to count towards your promotion and tenure package. So that's something else you can negotiate. It's like, will these things count as part of my package? I'll give you an example of a friend. This friend has been a lecturer. He's not a leader. He's been a lecturer for a bunch of years. And now he just got a job as an assistant professor in the same institution where he had been a lecturer for a bunch of years. So what was his negotiation? His negotiation was, are all these things that I have done as a lecturer at this institution going to count as part of my tenure package, even though I did them under a different title? Number one. And number two, can I reduce my can I reduce my number of years that I have to be assistant professor? And after that, you decide, do I still want to do this? I mean, is this a good bargain that I'm getting? It might not be worth it, because then you compete, in a sense, with a bunch of people who have been there for 6 full years. And it might be that your publications are not enough, or something like that, that then you are competing in a harder situation than the other people who are going out with a full clock. So, but yeah, you can negotiate, but be very careful about that kind of thing.
So first, if we have an assistant professor search, we cannot automatically change it to an associate search. The dean is going to veto that. Associates cost a lot more money. Second, the only way we would do it is if we were normally recruiting an advanced assistant professor that we wanted to steal away from Harvard or Stanford. We might take a 5th or 6th year assistant professor, and as part of their package coming in, give them associate level. I have never heard of somebody who had not held the title of assistant professor being jumped to associate professor. And I would like to reiterate the point that tenure is partly about what you've done since you've arrived at that institution. You get the job because you're amazing, and all that background will help you get those jobs. But now I need to see that you can teach here, that you can get your grant dollars here, that you can get things done here. And so this is why I think sometimes people choose not to shorten the clock, because they are going to be compared to those people that have more time at an institution. It's a perfectly reasonable question to ask, do I have the option of going up early? Is that heard of here if I should decide to do so? And sometimes people will negotiate a short clock. You could. I don't know that I would recommend that to any of my students. The other thing is, you have to remember that if I give someone an offer of associate, I got to go through the AP&T, the Appointments, Promotion, Tenure Committee. I can't make any promises about what they'll consider, and that takes a tremendous amount of time, often something that would not be doable in the constraints of a search.
All right, let me open up another can of worms now. I'm going to start with Mina this time.
No.
So, in the previous panel discussion about the interview process, we asked about what's the best time to ask about the two-body problem. And everyone concurred that the best time to ask was at the point of an offer being made. So what are some good approaches to the two-body problem at your institution?
And in my case, I have never done it. So, I have been lucky, maybe, I don't know, that my husband is not in academia, and so we haven't done that. I have the case of a lot of friends, and each of them have actually a different situation. Like, I have a friend who was able to get a lecturer position for his wife, and they both work heavily in the same institution, and that has worked out for them. I have another couple of friends who she got an assistant professor job, and he got he was able to negotiate for him a 1-year position in a different department with the hopes that that position will become then longer term, and it didn't happen. So he was there for 1 year, and then they had to figure it out again, start over. And I have the case of a friend who actually graduated from Duke with me, who has a husband who is in academia, and since they graduated, have never lived in the same state, because they both have academic jobs in different institutions, and they were not able to negotiate. They're both brilliant, but they were not able to negotiate to be with the other person. And so from, I think it's been 8 years, and they still live in different states. and they're both tenured in their institutions now. So I'm glad that I found a job where my husband is also happy with his job, but we're not in academia together. So,
What would you do, if a candidate that to whom you had extended an offer said, "I would love to come to Elon. I have a spouse who also needs a job." What would be, as a search committee chair, for example, what would be kind of your response?
the only thing I can do is check with the dean at that point. And our dean is the Dean of Arts and Sciences, and ask if the spouse falls into that school, ask if there's something that we can do about that. But me as a chair of the search committee cannot promise anything. I mean, all I can do is make the case for how much we want her or him, and then based on that say, but we have this other issue to solve.
So I have a two-body problem, except that we've resolved it. My husband's on faculty at UNC Chapel Hill, so that's great. We did live apart for almost 2 years, but it was because at the point when we had to pick our jobs, we were not in the point in the relationship where one person wanted to give up their dream job for the other person. It would have been premature at that time. And so basically, my husband's very good, and he got recruited by UNC because they knew I was here, and so it worked out great. However, it doesn't always that simple. And so what I would say is that this is the #1 reason we lose people is spousal issues. They have so we work very hard to try to accommodate spouses, whether it's trying to help you find a job in the area, or the more difficult one, the academic two bodies. And I think what you see a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, is you see that one person has to make a compromise. So it is. We get chairs, we get deans calling us wanting to put people in our department and pay their full salary for 3 years because they want to hire their spouse. And so there is, I think, at an R1, they will work to find a temporary position for your spouse. My husband placed a student at Iowa and got his wife a job in English, which is like unheard of. But again, it was a contract position, not a tenure track position. So I think what is tricky for some young people is deciding if there's only going to be one tenure track, who's going to do that and who's going to take the more kind of side route. Otherwise, I think if you both want the tenure track, you have to figure it out early, because once you both have tenure, you're too expensive to get moved. And so I know a lot of people that have done this in the short term, and then they basically give themselves a couple of years to figure it out. It's time to get more credentials, to be more competitive in an assistant professor search. It's just not right for everybody.
Ask a quick follow-up. So you brought up something that I've never actually considered. My partner is not an academic.
Yes.
He's in the real world.
Yes.
And I never thought about the possibility of leveraging a position to help find him a job that's not in academia. And I wouldn't do it as part of the negotiation process.
Yeah, so
how do you even bring that up?
Well, I mean, first of all, they would be so thrilled to hear that your spouse is not an academic. I think we have an office for that here at Duke, where they have community contacts, and it's not like they can get your spouse a job in place Y, but they can they basically call in favors. They can get like, when we had a job candidate visiting recently, her partner is a veterinarian, and so we set him up a thing with the dean of the veterinarian school at NC State, so he could talk to them about research opportunities there. Can't give him a job at NC State, but at least we can give him introductions and actually get them scheduled for him, and then it's up to him to make those opportunities. We had one person had a spouse who was a potter, and the then chair drove this woman all around North Carolina looking at different pottery studios and things, so that hopefully she would see something that she really liked. And so I think you know, I think that they're really motivated. This is a very, very common problem, that you have to accommodate a family. And so I think especially if you're talking about a non-academic person, at a minimum, they should be willing to make some suggestions. I don't think you can say, I won't come if my spouse doesn't have a job. I've also seen cases where people have found a job within the university for the spouse, even though they don't tend to be an academic person. Hey, you're a data analyst, you could do data with institutional data. Hey, you are a lawyer, well, we have a legal department. So that is where they may also have some suggestions. I think there are no guarantees, but I think it is not, as long as you're not pushing and don't put down ultimatums, there's no harm in asking.
They've basically covered everything. In our institution, again, it's not going to be a lot of room for negotiation, but for example, if I was looking to move right now and I got an offer from somebody, we'd have to replace my wife's salary. I mean, that would be something that's like, you know, I'm not leaving here and cutting our family income when we're getting closer and closer to retirement by the amount she's making here with benefits. So it would be, I'd go to those people and say, look, this is a situation, can you help us out? And she's not an academic, but can you help us out? And again, most places are going to be willing to at least look, and lots of times, like Beth said, you can get a job here, you know, or at another college doing what you normally do, or what your spouse normally does. But if you are in a really two-body academic situation, yeah, figure out who's going to be going tenure first and what's going to be. You end up 8 years apart.
Both tenured.
Yeah. Oh, and one other thing I would say, some schools have reciprocal agreements, right? So Duke works with UNC and with NC State to resolve such issues. And what they will typically do is a step down in salary. So like if we want someone and their spouse, there's no place for them at Duke, but they would fit at UNC. Duke may in fact offer to pay that salary for 3 years. This is only for people that they desperately want, and it depends upon the other institution agreeing to take the person, and sometimes people turn away free people. And from their perspective, if it's a tenure track line, it may not be a good deal just to have someone paid for 3 years. So I think that but the point is just broadly, there's a number of avenues that could be explored.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to start with Beth for the next question. And so continuing on in this idea that a candidate, an applicant, a finalist might have a life beyond his or her academic pursuits. If you have children who will also be moving with you, hopefully when you take the job, you will not be leaving behind. Can you negotiate parental leave, flexible work hours, those kinds of things as part of a faculty job offer?
I would never mention hours. Like, I feel like faculty work all around the time. I would not negotiate ahead for non-existent children. You know, I mean, I personally, especially as a woman, I would not bring it up unless I had a reason to. I think that it should be very clear what their parental leave policy is. And basically, in most cases, it's mandated. If you are expecting a baby, they have to give it to you, you know. And at that, but I would personally not pre-negotiate, you know, what I was going to do if I was to have a child. I mean, I'm the person who waited until after my tenure vote to like tell people that I was pregnant when I think they probably could tell, you know. So I just think it's like, it's something that like I don't think it belongs in negotiation myself.
Again, check the faculty handbook. Like Beth just said, it's got to be in there and what's going to be happening. Yeah, to put it out there when you're negotiating, it sounds like, yeah, I want this job, but I really don't want to work. So, you know, I'd like to come in at 10 and leave at 2, and I want all my classes scheduled there. Once those things happen, and again, it depends on the institution, what other obligations you have, and whether it's an R1 institution or not, like mine. what your time constraints are going to be. But once those things happen, obviously you've got the stuff legally that they have to do. And in relationship with whoever your chair is. I have a faculty person in my department right now whose wife has a debilitating illness, and he has a long commute to work. I work with his schedule to make sure that that's not a problem. And of course, we offer online classes too, so that can help with his teaching load. But I'm not going to make him be there 5 days a week from 8 to 5 so that, and then have his wife be alone the whole time. But that's, again, relationally, once his situation has been established.
Yeah, I wouldn't give away much personal information. I don't know how much you want to tell them about your personal life before you actually need it. I had an existing child, so no, I don't. It was already here. I mean, when I went in the market, I had a 6-month-old. I never asked about maternity policies. Some institutions told me about them, but I never asked. So I don't know how much you want to be sharing your personal information or announcing your family plans to people you don't know if you're ever going to, that they're even going to be your potential employers or not. So I think those things are, the negotiation happens after. Once you're pregnant, or when you're going to have a baby, then you start negotiating, and people normally are pretty good at accommodating. And the maternity policy or the parental leave and all those kinds of things are in the faculty handbook. So you can see, what's the policy for everybody. So, but yeah, I wouldn't be sharing too much of your personal information.
Let me do a quick follow-up. So what if, say, I would imagine the faculty handbook would say like LGBT considerations for partners, that they welcome that and they don't tolerate any kind of intolerance. But so do I share the fact that hi, I have a partner and we're expecting to adopt a child in 2 years. I had this conversation last Friday in DC, and the guy said, "Oh no, you don't say that." And so, but he's a friend, so I'm glad I mentioned that. But would you advise somebody sharing your sexual orientation, just to check what the feel of the?
I wouldn't personally. I mean, I would definitely find out the policy, and you can find out the policy
without telling them.
Without telling them, just because I don't know. I guess I would just be careful. And certainly if an adoption was 2 years down the road, I would not tell them that. And you would want to, like, the policy, then you want to know, do they do parental leave for adoptions or not? And so all of these things are laid out in Duke's policy. Like, I can tell you, you would get parental leave for adoption, and it is, applicable broadly, partners defined. But you should be able to find out that information without having to tell them.
Personally asked.
If it's not in the faculty handbook, look on the HR webpage. Because a lot of our stuff happens to be on human resources that's not specifically spelled out in the faculty handbook. And yeah, adopting in 2 years is no different. Say, hey, I plan on getting pregnant in 2 years. Just don't go there. Too much can happen. You don't know if that's really going to happen, and it shouldn't make any difference.
And also they shouldn't ask.
Right.
They shouldn't ask, are you planning on getting pregnant in 2 years? Are you planning to, do you have children?
With that in mind, what if you do get asked those kinds of questions and you don't want to answer?
I think you don't refuse to answer questions, because then you kind of look like a jerk, like the kind of person who's going to always be enforcing laws. No, that's an illegal question. I can't tell you.
This, right?
And somebody will ask you,
Yeah.
right? And it's just going to happen. And I think you should be prepared with some kind of answer that you're comfortable with. Oh yeah, I do have a partner, and we're in the process of figuring out things.
Yeah,
Very vague.
For our interview guidelines, and I imagine most places like this, you have questions not to ask.
Yeah.
But you
But
always
there are
have,
other ways of asking them without
Right.
asking.
Yeah.
or you have the wild card who's in on the interview who just is going to ask the question anyway, just because they're not thinking about it.
Or spouses. Sometimes I have been in this situation many years ago where like, I think they often don't want to send this is a long time ago, a very young woman out to dinner with just a man. And so they might have him bring his wife, and then she's like, oh, what do? Do you have kids? Are you married? And so that kind of thing can happen. And again, I think you'll look like a real jerk if you're like, those are illegal questions.
Yeah, just go kind of a gray.
Yeah.
Say, well, we're not really sure, we're figuring that stuff out.
Yeah.
So circling back to kind of the negotiation process, but in the same vein, I think we're going to skip ahead, panelists, to question number 9 here. And that is, do age, race, gender, any of those kinds of demographic features play a role in the success that candidates have in negotiating? And the question says negotiating increased salaries, but I would just say negotiating in general. And if so, how do you suggest candidates could address these disparities? I think I've lost track of who we were going to ask.
Okay, who wants to handle this one first?
Jim.
Oh, thanks, man. Okay, it's the token old white male up here. And it's interesting again because I am the face of diversity at Shaw. All my bosses are black females. Obviously, the right answer is no, it shouldn't, and it never happens. On the other hand, in reality, sometimes it will. And again, part of it, I'll be non-politically correct here, and I'll go back to my days here at Duke. Going to conferences, ours was the American Academy of Religion, trying to get interviews. And diversity was a major push. And one of my friends, who was a woman, apologized to me at the meeting because she was getting wined and dined. Because all these departments who were made up of nothing but people that looked like me needed some females. And they would do anything to get her. Now, hey, that's life. I didn't, that's the way it was. So that did give her some leverage in negotiation. But And I don't know, the second half of the question, how do you address these disparities? I don't know how you find out. I'm not sure how you would find out if age was getting to something within that. So you two can chime in here and we can talk about it more.
Beth?
So in general, I think that we would want to be very careful not to offer less to someone in a way that might be perceived as being anti-female, anti-minority, whatever. Like, I think the dean's office does not want to get caught in that. That said, and this I have to say very carefully, the data suggests that men are more likely to ask for things. And sometimes if you don't ask, you don't get it. Is that the fault of the person who doesn't ask? I'm not trying to blame anyone, but I think sometimes some people ask more and then they get more. And so what I would recommend, if you think, regardless of race, ethnicity, whatever, but if you know yourself, and I'm not good at asking for things, then what I would do is be prepared. Know your worth, know what you need, have the data to back it up, because it's a lot easier to negotiate for things if you feel like you're coming off of some facts than just saying, give me stuff. I mean, this is, I benefited from this when I was an assistant professor because they hired a black male at the same time, and he happened to be a neuroimager, which if you do fMRI research, you need a heck of a lot more money than someone like me. And I know my chair, who was a woman, was like, they cannot pay the man more than the woman, and so I will get you the same startup, even though you don't need it. So I think people are looking out for things, but you have to remember sometimes that you have to ask.
Well, in my university, the search committee does the recommendation to the dean, but then the negotiation is kept in the dean's office. So whatever happens there, I don't know about. So I know, like Beth says, that no of the deans want to be caught into anything that is not completely equal to everybody that they're hiring at the same time. But we're completely off of that, so we wouldn't find out. I know I've read somewhere that only 7% of women negotiate, whereas 57% of men negotiate. So, if they get more, it's because they're asking for more. So, we need to do a better job of that. And if you can back it up with data, and so you can make a case and you can build your justification into your work that you're going to be doing in the institution, then your case will be stronger.
And,
but
and you can think about what ways it might be easiest for you to ask, right? So maybe you're not going to be good at telling the stern chair over the phone what you want, but you feel like you could write an email better explaining what you need. Like, you don't have to do it the same way as everybody else.
Right.
Just, it's okay to ask as long as you're polite and you don't push. I think that, hopefully the chair is your advocate or the dean, but the chair in our case would advocate for you to the dean, and they would try to make sure you did not kind of undersell yourself.
For a lot of institutions, again, look in the Chronicle and find out the salary information as best you can. Works better in larger institutions, and obviously public institutions, like Beth said, you can find, what somebody's making at NC State, because they have to make it public. At a lot of the smaller liberal arts institutions, you're not going to be able to find accurate information, because we don't have to give it. And so that gives you a little less leeway as far as finding out what somebody else is making.
Yeah, and be very careful where you get your information from. The last thing you want to do is be like, I heard you pay assistant professors X, so that's what I want. And you're like, where did you hear that?
Right.
Like, you need real data.
Yeah.
So would it be helpful then to identify the data source? If you say, I've been doing some research and according to X data source, it looks like the common salary is.
Yeah, I think you would be very careful. I would never mention, when I'm looking at a state school database, I would never say, well, I see you pay so-and-so this amount. I would be like, on average, it looks like.
Of the range.
This is the range for assistant professors, and I was hoping to be in that range, or something like that. But, like for example, Duke has a salary discrepancy between men and women, and it's pretty sizable. It's not clear what drives that. We have more male full professors than female full professors. You can start arguing about whether or not productivity is equal. There's field differences. I don't know, but there is a gender difference in faculty salaries here at Duke, and they're very aware of that. But if I go look at like the Chronicle and take the salary out of that for the research institution, I wish that was my salary. They have it for Duke, right? This is Duke's salary. This is how much Duke pays an associate professor. But it's what I ended up doing was like figuring out a formula based off of state school. It's complicated. I won't go there. But anyways, so I think that you need to realize that some of those numbers may be misleading because maybe they have people in economics averaged in, and economists make a ton of money because they can go out and make money in the real world. So you have to be very careful when looking at those numbers because they may or may not apply to you.
It is discipline specific, folks, and you have to realize that if they're working at Fuqua, they're going to be making more than somebody, again, who's teaching English composition here. I mean, it's supply and demand. That's just the life we live. If I wanted to make money, I wouldn't have gone into religion and ethics. Right now, for example, we've been looking for somebody with a PhD in criminal justice for a long time. It's just, and that's a specific social science, but it's one of those things. It's what the market is demanding.
So, at this point, I think we've had some great questions from the audience so far. I want to open it back up to questions from the audience because we have survived all the questions that I sent in advance. Elizabeth.
So I'd like to ask if there's a real difference between the advice you've given in negotiating job offers versus postdocs, right? Because some of the postdocs have interviews and they give specific offers, and a friend told me that he negotiated moving costs. But so how would you say, what are the differences?
So when postdocs have a lot less flexibility in the sense that if it's a grant-funded position, the salary may be written into the grant. You know, it's not something I can go to the dean and get more money for. It's what the line item is in my grant. Typically, institutions will have a hard floor for postdoc salaries, so I would go to your office of postdoc, whatever relations, and see what they suggest as a minimum salary. For my field, I tell people to look at NIH guidelines, which actually does take years of experience into account for postdoc salaries. I do know postdocs who've been able to go over the NIH level when it's like, you know, the person really wants them, or it's like Boston, where like you can't live on the NIH level. So I think there's some room for salary. I think moving costs is probably the most common thing a postdoc has the power to negotiate, because it's not really a lot of money, but to you when you move your stuff, $1,000 is a lot of money. So, but from the perspective of the PI, it's a way to fix these things. I've never heard of a postdoc being able to negotiate a job for a significant other, and they don't really have, I mean, like, you're not gonna get to negotiate space. I mean, you'll understand what the job parameters are, but a lot of times it's not really something they can change.
Yeah, I would say something a lot more limited.
I will add an answer to your question and to the panelists' comments that there's going to be a postdoc panel coming up on November 5th at 11 a.m. that's going to be specific to humanities and social sciences. And so there'll be more opportunities to ask questions about those opportunities then as well.
Bring up, you mentioned, specifically I'm going to you because you mentioned course release and you have to ask for it, but also you don't want to sound like you don't want to work.
Right.
So how and when do you bring that up?
I would say when you're negotiating, you just say, you know, since I'm coming into a new institution, and so until I can get adjusted and used to the way that Elon works or whatever institution, then has your department built in a course release for a new hire? Like that.
So it doesn't, I mean,
I think it's so common.
It's so common that they want, you know, what they want to
They'll
look
say yes or
weird.
no,
Right.
you know, and if they say no, they say no.
Like
But
I
I don't
said,
think
my
the
department
question
has
is weird.
already one course release aside in case they ask. You know, it's like we're expecting it. You know?
okay, so it doesn't come across as like,
Nah.
you don't want a job.
No, like if you
And
ask,
everybody. Yeah.
if you asked us for a course release, we'd say you automatically get one as a junior faculty and you cannot go lower than that.
I would say in the last 3 years, it's surprising when they don't ask for a course release.
I actually have three questions fast. So you touched on this, briefly, but what's the role of like, the search committee and the department chair and the dean and maybe other people involved in this whole process? What are their different roles? And then the second question is, I still feel a bit uncomfortable about negotiating, especially salary, not these other things that are individual specific. Could you guys give some examples where you think this candidate negotiates salary in a very appropriate manner? Something you would recommend? Not, so you already given an example of using public school standard as a benchmark, but besides that, in other cases, can you give an example? And the third question is, how can I find out the policy of a school hiring foreign nationals, and what the policy on helping with applying for permanent residence, that kind of stuff?
I'll take the last one first. Get it in writing. And because I've been through this, a couple of reasons. One, my wife did a lot of that with people in the research lab she originally worked in here for Dr. Zapp. and so she helped with getting visas, etc. We also had a situation at my institution where a friend of mine was a Chinese national and was promised things orally as far as helping with her status. And over the course of a few years, that didn't pan out. And, you know, the clock was ticking. So anything, that's a great negotiating. I mean, it's not a big deal for an institution to do that. And so just make that part of the contract. You know, when you are negotiating, that would be my advice. You can handle yours.
I would say be open about it, be clear about it, because the reverse case has happened to us actually. That at Elon we always have a part of the interview process is you have a meeting with somebody in, well, it's part of the study abroad office, but it also handles everything that has to do with faculty that are foreigners. And so they kind of ask you what your status is, but they can tell you these are the choices that we offer a faculty who aren't born in the U.S. because I was born in Spain, so I had that talk. That was part of my interview. And so you don't have to disclose what your status is, but it's kind of expected that by the time that you actually get the offer in writing, that the institution will know, because it will depend a lot in how, in the timing. Like if something needs to be done, like paperwork has to happen before you can actually start teaching, and you tell me 2 weeks before, it's not going to happen. And I'm going to have 2 or 3 classes that I don't have a professor for. So I will say you have that time between the time that you get all that information about the different paths until you get your offer to kind of disclose, and I will need help with this. And you already know in that institution, or in the case of my institution, how that is handled. Because if not, it feels a little bit like you're trying to obscure things for us and make things difficult for us. And then it puts us in a very difficult position when we have to rush things that don't always, that can always be rushed. So I know that in the last couple of years there was one case in which we were sweating it. We did not know if that person was going to be, able to start teaching or not. So I will say, that's what normally happens. I don't know what you want.
I don't really have anything to add to that. I think you guys covered that part. The other part of the question. Yeah, so I think this is something that is going to vary from school to school, because you're saying at your school they negotiate directly with the dean or human resources?
Or vice president.
Vice president, right. Whereas here at Duke, you negotiate with the chair, who would then advocate and do the negotiations with the dean for you. And when I've had job offers before, sometimes it's been the chair, sometimes it's been the dean. I've never done negotiations with the search chair though. The search chair doesn't have any power to give you stuff. It's chairs and deans and provosts and people like that that have the power to give stuff. And you should be able to tell, partly because you'll get your schedule ahead of time, and you'll be able to see who the big wig on the schedule is.
And again, if you're going to do it, just give reasons. If you want to negotiate a higher salary, tell them why. Just say, hey, I want more money. But, I mean, I had to do, when I became chair, for example, the vice president told me, hey, we want you to be chair. And our chairs are not one of these. I remember when I was here, it was like the last thing anybody wanted was to be chair of the department, and they rotated it all the time so they'd get out of it. Ours are appointed as part of we're part of the faculty administration, and it is, as you serve to the president says, hey, you're not going to be chair anymore. I was offered salary, and I just looked at it and said, wait a second. All you're doing is lengthening the term of my contract, because I was on a 10-month contract. That's how we work things out. And I was going to 11, and it was like, wait a minute, I'm not getting paid any more money. It was stretching it out over 11 months. And so I brought that up, and she said, oh yeah, that's right. And so, it's a matter of, okay, how do we reason this out? What are the reasons for, you saying, well, I'd like more money?
So the other thing I would add is if you're comfortable, maybe you have a trusted advisor or you know someone else who's similar to you that has recently been on the market, and you can say, look, this is what they offered me. Is this a lowball? Am I being unreasonable? And I think sometimes if you're a little unsure about negotiating, just getting someone else to say, yeah, go ask them for a little bit more can give you the confidence to do that.
So a couple other questions. Stefan and then Samantha.
Yes, I think part of my question has been answered when you said get things in writing, because I was wondering if you negotiate on the phone, should you always ask for a follow-up in an email? Okay.
I mean, typically at the end of the day, you'll get they'll actually FedEx you a letter that you have to sign and send back. And that letter should have all the information in it. And sometimes they will send you the draft of that letter ahead of time so you can make sure there's nothing missing.
Yeah, I got the draft of the letter in an email after the first phone call. Then I negotiated something, and I got another draft with those things already changed. And then I got the letter that I was supposed to sign.
Thank you.
Samantha.
So a couple years ago, there was this horror story in the Chronicle about someone that negotiated and then the job offer was rescinded. Have you ever heard of that as like a primary or secondary source instead of like a tertiary account? So, and what happened for them to rescind the offer? It wasn't just that you asked for more money, I'm assuming. It was like,
This was not me personally.
right, no.
Okay.
The royal.
Yeah, I think that sometimes you would normally get signals of this, that the negotiations are going nowhere, and the person is going to say, we're going to have to stop because we're not getting anywhere. We're not going to be able to give you what you want. This is not going to be a good fit. I generally speak, I've seen it kind of in two different situations. One is where the person really was a jerk about it, and the other is the person kind of just dragged their feet on everything and didn't show any enthusiasm, and so finally it's like, okay, let's just hire someone else.
And this, Mina alluded to this earlier. You're going into a department with colleagues you're going to be working with.
Yeah.
If you're going
You don't want
to
to
be abrasive and hard to get along with,
They don't want you.
we don't want you. And if that comes out in the negotiating process, it's like, okay, yeah, let's go another route.
The other time I've seen it happen, I can think of examples, is when the person is unable to produce their diploma.
What?
When did they ask you to produce your diploma?
I had to produce my diploma when I started here. Like I had to provide a photocopy of it because it's there will be people who will be just almost there, and I would not recommend doing this. It's really bad. I know people who've lost their jobs, or they've stopped construction on their labs and docked their salary. Do not surprise a chair or dean with the lack of a PhD if they're expecting you to have one, because that is going to have major consequences. So that's another case where I've seen things kind of fall apart.
We require everybody to get official transcripts, whether they're being hired as an adjunct or full-time or anything. We want official transcripts. That just helps with accreditation from SACS too.
So Princeton pulled an offer this year for data fraud.
Okay, so don't be a jerk.
And don't
Yeah.
lie.
Don't
I
lie,
was
don't be a
gonna
jerk.
do, that's
Yeah.
what I mean, my next
Don't
one.
make up your data. Okay.
Yeah, we require the transcripts before you, with the acceptance that you're coming to campus. So it's way before the offer.
Right.
So if you're coming to campus, it's because we have the transcripts in hand. Otherwise, you're not coming. And the don't lie part, it happened to me one year, many years ago, when I was the chair of a search committee. There was one person who had all these beautiful publications in the resume. One of the members of the search committee, I don't know why, she looked for one of the articles, just it sounded interesting. I'm going to read this. So wasn't there. She couldn't find it.
Oh.
I was like, I guess I just didn't write, I don't know what happened. So she was just curious about it. So in the interview, this is a previous interview, not the on-campus interview. It was in the previous one. I said, hey, I think, that article sounded really great. It had never been published. Never been published. Oh yeah, they promised me. It had page numbers and everything. I mean, it had the whole thing. It was there. I'm like, don't lie. It's so easy, to catch you. And you're out of. I mean, you're out of the search. Obviously, you're out of the job. But the community of academia is so small. You have no idea. And when somebody does crazy things like that, it just finds a way into other people's conversations.
And we will tend to look at things. I mean, I hired a guy as an adjunct this past year and looked up some of this stuff because I wanted to be able to intelligently interview the person.
Ask questions.
Ask some questions about what he's been researching, what he's been writing on. So, it's easy to find this information. So, be honest.
Well, on that note, that very upbeat note, please join me in thanking our panelists, Dr. Marsh, Dr. Berkeley, Dr. Smith.